I won $40 million in the lottery. The whole family raised their glasses to celebrate. My husband's hand trembled as he drank. Something was wrong. I secretly swapped his glass with mine and pretended to go downstairs to take out the trash. 10 minutes later, I had to call an ambulance. My mother-in-law went insane. That night, if I hadn't noticed my husband's trembling hand as he poured the wine, the person lying in the emergency room would have been me. My name is Sarah, and my husband's name is Mark. We've been married for 8 years. 8 years sounds long. But looking back, I realized that for most of our marriage, I lived like someone borrowing happiness. I tried to endure everything, to understand, to perfectly play the role of a wife and a daughter-in-law. But that night, everything changed. I still remember that afternoon very clearly. I had just come home from work to see Mark standing in the middle of the living room, holding a small piece of paper. His face flushed. He was trembling so much that the paper shook with him. As soon as he saw me walk in, he yelled, "You won, Sarah, you won!" I still didn't understand what was happening. He rushed over and hugged me tightly. The lottery. The jackpot. $40 million. I stood frozen, my head buzzing. $40 million, a sum so immense for an ordinary person like me. But strangely, I didn't feel happy. Not because of the money, but because 3 hours earlier, while using Mark's phone to order food, I'd accidentally seen a one-line text message. "It's in your hands now. Do it. Don't hesitate." The message was from a contact saved as Mom. I didn't read any further, but a woman's intuition sent a chill down my spine. "Sarah, are you listening to me?" Mark shook me. I forced a smile. "Yes, I hear you." He grinned so wide his eyes crinkled. $40 million. After taxes, that's still over $30 million. He spun around the living room like a child. "I've already called my parents and my sister to come over. We're celebrating tonight." I looked at him, the man who had slept beside me for 8 years. There were times I thought I knew him, but that day, his face suddenly seemed like a stranger's. Half an hour later, the house started to fill up. My father-in-law, Richard, walked in first. He clapped Mark hard on the shoulder. "That's my boy! Making the Miller name proud!" My mother-in-law, Linda, was different. She stormed right up to me, grabbed my hand, and smiled. "Sarah, I always said you were a lucky daughter-in-law." Her eyes sparkled, but I couldn't tell if it was from joy or from the money. The last to arrive was my sister-in-law, Jessica. She was wearing a brand new designer outfit, probably bought with my credit card. "You really won?" Jessica shrieked. $40 million? Mark beamed. "After taxes? Probably over $30 million. Jessica immediately linked her arm through mine. "Oh, sister-in-law, that's amazing. I've been eyeing a beach house in Malibu. It's only $20 million. You and Mark can come vacation there later." I gently pulled my arm away. "Let's talk about that later." That evening, I cooked a huge meal. The dining table was laden with dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. A total of 12 dishes. My in-laws ate and drank happily, as if the money were already in their pockets. As she ate, Jessica said, "You're going to claim the money tomorrow, right?" Mark nodded. Linda immediately chimed in. "You have to be careful with money. Why don't you transfer it all to your father's account? Your dad used to be an accountant. He knows how to manage it." I put down my fork. The room fell silent. "Why transfer it to Dad?" I asked. Richard cleared his throat. "You're a woman, not used to handling such large matters. Let the men handle it." I looked at each of them, then said slowly, "But I'm the one who bought the ticket." The table went silent. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me. Mark was the first to force a laugh. Right, the credit goes to my wife." He stood up. "Come on, let's have a celebratory drink." Mark went to the kitchen. I saw him open the liquor cabinet and take out a bottle of expensive whiskey. It was the bottle I had given my father-in-law last year. He had never opened it. Mark brought it to the table. A special day calls for a special drink. He took out 2 small glasses and poured the whiskey. But right then, I saw his hand tremble. It wasn't a tremor of joy, but one of tension. My heart suddenly clenched. Mark pushed 1 glass towards me. "Let's, husband and wife, drink first." The light shone on the whiskey, its color a clear amber. The 2 glasses were identical, but for some reason, I felt something was wrong. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I picked up my phone. Wait a second. This whiskey is so beautiful, I have to post a picture. While pretending to adjust the camera angle, I looked closely at the 2 glasses. Then I saw a small scratch on Mark's finger. And when he put the glass down, he intentionally turned that finger towards my glass. He was marking it. My heart went cold. I pretended to accidentally bump the table. The 2 glasses vibrated slightly, their positions shifting just enough. Mark didn't notice. He picked up the glass closest to him. "To you, my dear wife. Congratulations." I looked at him, smiled, and then suddenly clutched my forehead. "Oh, Mark, I'm a little dizzy. Can we switch glasses? Yours has less." The air in the room froze. Mark stood there, stunned. The glass stopped in midair. Linda immediately said, "Don't switch. That's unsanitary." I laughed. "We're husband and wife. What's the big deal?" Then I quickly swapped the glasses. Mark's face turned white, but with everyone watching, he couldn't refuse. He closed his eyes and drank the whiskey in one go. I drank too. The whiskey was strong, but nothing happened. Mark stared at me, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. A moment later, I stood up. "The trash in the kitchen is full. I'll go take it out," Jessica said. "Let me do it," I smiled. "It's okay. I'm so happy today, I just need some fresh air." I took the trash bag and walked out the door. But I didn't go downstairs. I stood in the stairwell, opened my phone, and watched the security camera feed from inside the house. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Suddenly, Jessica, who was eating, froze. She clutched her throat, her eyes wide. And then she fell to the floor, foaming at the mouth. I turned off the screen, leaning my back against the wall. From upstairs, I could hear screams, cries, and the sound of things crashing. I lit a cigarette. The smoke drifted upwards. 8 years of marriage had finally ended that night. I stood in the dark stairwell, leaning against the cold wall. The screams from the 8th floor echoed down in waves. "Jessica! Jessica, my baby! Someone call 911! My mother-in-law Linda's voice broke in panic. I looked at my phone screen one more time, then turned off the camera. Inside the apartment, everything was chaotic. Jessica was convulsing on the floor, her limbs flailing against the chairs, white foam bubbling from the corner of her mouth. Mark stood frozen as if nailed to the floor. Richard was frantically on the phone. I took a deep breath and carried the trash bag downstairs, like someone completely oblivious to what was happening. The night was a bit cold, the wind blowing through the apartment complex, carrying the smell of dry leaves. I put the trash bag in the dumpster and stood still for a moment, a flood of images flashing through my mind. 8 years of marriage. The times I worked late to pay the mortgage. The times Jessica swiped my credit card to buy handbags. The times Linda sighed in front of relatives. "My daughter-in-law can't seem to give us a grandson." Those words used to hurt me, but I endured them because I thought that's what family was. Thinking back now, I realized how naive I was. I stood for a few more minutes and then went back up. When I opened the apartment door, the smell of antiseptic filled the living room. 2 paramedics were carrying a stretcher with Jessica on it, her face pale, her lips purple. Linda was sobbing. My baby, my baby!" I rushed over. "What happened, Mom?" I said, my eyes welling up, trying to look panicked. Mark turned to look at me, and his gaze sent a chill down my spine. It contained 3 things: fear, confusion, and something else, realization. He knew I had swapped the glasses, but in front of everyone, he couldn't say a word. A doctor spoke quickly. The patient is in acute poisoning. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. The stretcher was wheeled out the door. Linda staggered after it. Let me go with her. Richard supported her. Mark stood for a few seconds, then ran after them. I walked slowly behind, my mind strangely calm, like someone watching a play whose ending I already knew. The hospital was crowded, the white lights blinding, the smell of disinfectant making my throat dry. Jessica was taken straight to the emergency room. The doors closed, leaving only the sound of crying outside. Linda slumped onto a chair. Oh God, my daughter! Richard paced back and forth like a caged animal, and Mark stood in a corner, his head down, his hands trembling. I walked over to him. Mark. He looked up. She only drank the whiskey, right? I asked softly. His face turned paler. What? What are you talking about? I looked straight into his eyes. I'm asking if there was something wrong with that glass of whiskey. He didn't answer. Just stared at me. In his eyes, there was a deep-seated fear. About 30 minutes later, the emergency room doors opened. A doctor came out, pulling off his mask. His expression was grim. The patient's family? Linda rushed forward. I'm her mother. The doctor shook his head slightly. We're very sorry. The patient's heart had stopped before she arrived. The initial cause is suspected to be chemical poisoning. The air seemed to freeze. Then suddenly, Linda screamed, No! She collapsed to the floor. Richard held his head. My daughter. I stood still, my heart pounding, but my face maintained a look of sorrow, because at that moment, everything was just beginning. A little later, Mark stepped out into the hallway. He looked around, then pulled me into a secluded corner. His hand gripped my shoulder tightly. You switched the glasses, he said, his voice a low, trembling whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I looked at him. What are you talking about? Don't pretend. His breath came in ragged gasps. That glass was meant for you, I replied slowly. Mark, you're the one who poured the whiskey. I only switched because I'm a light drinker. Is there a problem? His face was ashen. A drop of sweat trickled down his temple. You knew, he whispered. You knew there was poison in it. I looked at him and then let out a small, sad laugh. What are you saying? Are you trying to say you put poison in the whiskey to harm me? My voice trembled slightly, just enough for an outsider to hear the hurt of an offended wife. Mark immediately fell silent. A few people in the hallway were looking our way. He let go of my arm and took 2 steps back. No, I didn't. I lowered my voice. Mark, if that glass really had poison in it, then the person who was supposed to drink it was me. He said nothing more, just looked at me as if I were a stranger. Just then, 2 police officers walked in. One said, Family of Jessica Miller? Richard stood up. I'm her father. The officer nodded. The hospital reported signs of unusual poisoning. We need to ask a few questions. The hallway fell silent. Linda, sobbing, said, She only drank whiskey. The officer turned to Mark. You were the one who poured the drinks? His face went pale. Yes. Can you recount the entire evening for us? He glanced at me. His eyes filled with confusion. I knew what he was thinking. If he told the truth, he'd have to explain why the whiskey was poisoned. If he lied, things could spiral out of control. Finally, he just said, We had a normal family dinner. Then we had a celebratory drink. My sister had 1 glass and then she collapsed. The police officer took notes. Where's the bottle of whiskey? Richard answered. At home. The officer nodded. We'll need to collect it as a sample. Then he looked at all of us. During the investigation, we expect your full cooperation. No one slept that night. Linda cried until her voice was hoarse. Richard sat silently like a statue. As for Mark, he kept looking at me, as if he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. Near dawn, he went out to the balcony. I followed him. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. He said softly, Sarah. I remained silent. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I looked at him. What wouldn't? He bit his lip. I just wanted you to be asleep for a little while, so I could have time to transfer the money. My heart grew cold, but I still asked, what money? He looked up, his eyes desperate. The 30-something million. Mom and Dad said if you kept it, you would divorce me. I just wanted to keep our family together. I looked at the man before me and suddenly found it laughable. Keep the family together by poisoning his wife's drink. He bowed his head and said nothing. After a moment, he asked in a hoarse voice, You knew beforehand, didn't you? I looked out at the brightening sky. Mark, what do you think would have happened last night if I hadn't switched the glasses? He was silent. The wind blew across the balcony, carrying a chill. I said softly, The person lying in the morgue would be me. Behind us. Linda's crying started up again. A family had just shattered. And this was only the first day. The sun was fully up when we left the hospital. No one had slept, but no one had any tears left to cry. Linda was nearly exhausted. Slumped in a chair in the waiting room, Richard quietly handled the paperwork with the hospital. Mark stood outside in the hallway, his back against the wall, his eyes empty. I sat in a corner chair, my hands clasped together. No one knew what was going through my mind. Everything had happened so fast that if I weren't calm, I could have collapsed right then. But I couldn't collapse, because I knew very well that this play had one more important act. Around 8 a.m., the 2 police officers from the night before returned to the hospital. One was in his 40s, with a solid build and sharp eyes. The other was younger, holding a notepad. The older one introduced himself. I'm Detective Miller from the investigative unit. He looked around. We need to ask a few more questions. Richard immediately stood up. Detective, my daughter's death was wrongful. You have to find out why. His voice was hoarse. Detective Miller nodded. We're working on it. He turned to Mark. Last night, you were the one who poured the whiskey, correct? Mark nodded. Yes. Where did that bottle come from? At home, in the liquor cabinet. Had anyone opened it before? Mark shook his head. No. Detective Miller jotted down a few notes, then asked, Did anyone else touch the bottle before you poured from it? Mark was silent for a few seconds, his eyes unconsciously glancing towards Linda. Then he said, No, only me. That answer made me quietly clench my hands. He was trying to protect his mother, but I knew this would all come out sooner or later. Then the detective turned to me. You're Mark's wife. Yes. Could you recount yesterday's dinner from the beginning? I took a breath and spoke slowly. The family gathered to celebrate because my husband won the lottery. After dinner, he took out the whiskey to pour. Initially, he gave me 1 glass. I paused for a moment, but I saw that glass was a bit full. I'm a light drinker, so I asked to switch with him. The hallway was dead silent. Detective Miller looked up. You were the one who suggested switching glasses. Yes, I nodded. I just thought I should drink less. The officer took notes, then asked, And after that? After I finished my drink, I went downstairs to take out the trash. When I came back, everyone said Jessica had been poisoned. After I finished speaking, Detective Miller looked at me for a long time. It wasn't suspicion, but it was clear he was thinking. Just then, a doctor came out. He handed a folder to the police. Here are the initial lab results. The entire hallway held its breath. Detective Miller read a few lines, then looked up. There are traces of a highly potent chemical toxin in the patient's blood. The statement was like a thunderclap, Linda screamed. Impossible! Richard's face went pale. It was just whiskey. But the detective was looking straight at Mark. Mr. Miller, did you know there was poison in the whiskey? Mark's face was white as a sheet. No, we'll be taking the bottle for forensic analysis. In the meantime, we expect your cooperation. The family returned to the apartment at noon. The air inside was heavy, suffocating. The dinner table was untouched from last night, dishes unwashed. A chair still overturned, like a frozen photograph. The moment Linda walked in, she burst into tears. My daughter! Oh, God! She collapsed onto a chair. Richard sat silently beside her, and Mark stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the whiskey bottle on the table. His eyes filled with panic. I went into the kitchen and turned on the faucet. The sound of running water soothed my mind a little. A moment later, someone walked in. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Mark. He stood behind me, his voice hoarse. "Sarah." I didn't turn. "What is it?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "What are you planning to do?" I turned off the water and looked at him. "What are you asking?" He looked at me, as if searching for an answer in my eyes. "You know everything, don't you?" I didn't answer, just asked back. "What is it that you think I know?" Mark trembled. "Your mother just wanted me to be asleep for a while. We were going to move the money to your father's account. And then we would explain it to you." I laughed. It was a small, cold laugh. "Mark, do you think I'm that stupid?" He lowered his head, unable to speak. After a moment, I asked, "Did you know it was poison?" Mark shook his head violently. "No. I swear, I didn't know. Mom said it was just a sleeping pill." His voice was almost desperate. I looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "But the person who was supposed to drink that glass was me." He couldn't look at me anymore. That afternoon, the police returned. They brought evidence bags. The whiskey bottle was sealed, and the 2 glasses were also taken. Before leaving, Detective Miller turned and said, "We should have the lab results in a few days. Until then, no one is to leave the city." The door closed, and the apartment sank into silence. That evening, I was sitting in my room when I heard arguing from the living room. It was Linda, shrieking, "You're so stupid! I told you not to hesitate!" All she had to do was drink it, and it would have been over. My heart stopped. I stood behind the door, not daring to breathe. Mark's voice rose. "You said it was a sleeping pill. Jessica is dead. Dead, Mom. Do you understand?" Linda was silent for a few seconds. Then she said softly, "It's better that she's dead. At least the money is still here." That sentence sent a chill down my spine. I stepped out of the room. The mother and son immediately fell silent. Linda looked at me, her eyes a mixture of fear and hatred. "Daughter-in-law, what did you hear?" I looked at her and said slowly, "I just heard a mother who just lost her daughter, but it seems she's not in too much pain." The air froze. Linda gritted her teeth. "You!" But Mark pulled her back. "Mom," that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, only one thought in my mind. If I hadn't switched the glasses, I would be dead. People say money reveals a person's true nature, but I never imagined it could make a family so terrifying. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Just one line. "Don't think you've gotten away." I looked at the screen, a cold feeling running down my spine, because right then, outside my window, a figure was standing. The message on my phone still glowed. "Don't think you've gotten away." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Outside the bedroom window, the streetlights cast a pale yellow glow on the wall. A figure stood down in the parking lot, their face unclear, just a slender build and a dark coat. I got up and closed the curtains. 2 thoughts were in my head. One was fear, the other was clarity. Because when you survive a near-death experience, fear changes. It no longer paralyzes you, it makes you more alert. I quickly snapped a photo through a gap in the curtains with my phone. The figure below seemed to notice they were being watched, turned, and walked quickly away from the apartment complex. My heart still hadn't calmed down. Who sent that message? An outsider or someone in this house? I looked at the screen for a few more seconds, saved the photo, then turned off my phone and lay down, but I couldn't sleep all night. The next morning, the apartment was strangely quiet. No more crying, no more arguing. I walked out into the living room and saw Richard sitting on the sofa, his eyes red and swollen. Linda sat beside him, her face gaunt, but her eyes were colder than yesterday, and Mark stood by the window, He turned when he saw me, said nothing, just looked. The air between us was like an invisible wall, a wall built of suspicion, fear, and hatred. After a moment, Richard spoke first. "Sarah." I turned. "Yes, Dad." He cleared his throat. "What's happened has happened. We can't change it. From now on, we have to think about how to solve this." His voice was tired, but he still tried to maintain the air of the head of the family. I asked softly, "How do you plan to solve it, Dad?" Before he could answer, Linda interjected, "What else is there to do?" "Wait for the investigation results." Then she looked straight at me, her gaze as sharp as a knife. "But there's something I want to ask you." I remained silent. "When you switched the glasses, was it really an accident?" That question made the room feel heavy. Mark turned to look at me. Richard was watching too. I knew this moment was crucial. If I showed any sign of being unusual, everything would get complicated. I looked directly at Linda. "Yes, I just simply thought I should drink less." She sneered. "Really? Or did you know something was going to happen?" Her voice was full of suspicion. I frowned slightly. "What are you suggesting, Mom? Are you implying I knew the whiskey was poisoned?" Linda was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I don't know, but this is too much of a coincidence. The person who was supposed to drink that glass was you." That sentence startled Mark. He immediately said, "Mom!" But Linda didn't stop. "And you?" She looked at Mark. "I told you it was just a sleeping pill. Did you put it in the drink?" The air froze. I looked at Mark. He stood motionless, his face ashen. Richard was stunned too. "Linda, what are you talking about?" he asked. But Linda didn't answer him. She kept staring at Mark. "Tell me, did you put it in?" A few seconds later, Mark lowered his head. "I did." That confession made the room explode. Richard shot up from his seat. "What?" He looked at his son as if he were a stranger. You put poison in your own wife's drink?" His voice trembled. Mark didn't dare look up. I thought it was a sleeping pill. I didn't know it was poison." Richard turned to Linda. "You gave him the drug." Linda frowned. "So what? All the daughter-in-law had to do was sleep for a few hours, and we could have handled the money. Don't tell me you didn't want to keep that money in the family." Her words sent a chill down my spine. But what surprised me more was Richard's reaction. He slammed his hand on the table. "You're insane! That's murder!" Linda laughed. "Murder? You say it so nicely. But have you forgotten? You were the one who suggested transferring the money to your account." The room exploded a second time. The couple looked at each other like two strangers who had just discovered each other's secrets. I stood in the middle of the room, silently watching it all. A family. In just one night, it had become this. Mark suddenly knelt before me. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I really didn't know it was poison." I looked at him, a man in his 30s, kneeling in the living room, crying like a child. If this were before, maybe my heart would have softened. But now, I only felt cold. "Mark," I said softly, "if I hadn't switched the glasses, the person who died yesterday would have been me." He couldn't say anything more, just bowed his head. Just then, the doorbell rang. All four of us flinched. Richard went to open the door. 2 police officers stood outside. It was Detective Miller again. He walked in, his expression stern. "I have an announcement. We've received the lab results." The entire room was dead silent. The bottle of whiskey contained cyanide. "This is an extremely potent poison. Even a small amount can be fatal." Linda's face turned pale. Mark was trembling, and Richard took a step back. Detective Miller looked at each of them, then said slowly, "We need to ask Mr. Mark Miller and Mrs. Linda Miller to come down to the station for questioning." Those words made Linda scream. "I'm not going. I didn't do anything." But the police had already taken out the handcuffs. Mark didn't resist. He stood up and looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with despair. "Sarah, I really..." But he didn't finish his sentence. The police led him out the door. The apartment was left with just me and Richard. He sat down on the sofa, his hands trembling. My God. How did this family end up like this? I stood there, saying nothing, because I knew this was just the beginning. That afternoon, my phone vibrated again. A text from the unknown number. You think it's over? It's just beginning. I looked at the screen, my heart pounding, because this time, the message came with a picture of me, standing in front of the hospital last night. It meant someone had been following me. I stared at the photo on my phone for a long time. It was a picture of me, standing in front of the hospital the night before. The shot was taken from a distance, but my face was clear under the white lights, holding a trash bag, my gaze directed at the ground. This meant someone was near the hospital last night, and that person was watching me. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately opened the balcony door and looked down at the parking lot. Everything was normal, a few people walking around, no suspicious figures. But I knew very well, whoever this was, they weren't an idiot. If they could take a picture, they certainly knew how to avoid being seen. I locked my phone, my mind trying to piece everything together from the start. Who could be following me? My in-laws? Impossible. Mark and Linda had been taken away by the police. Richard was still in the house. An outsider? I thought about the $40 million lottery ticket, a sum large enough to make a lot of people change. As I was thinking, a sigh came from behind me. I turned around. Richard was still on the sofa. In just one night, he had aged so much. His gray hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken. "Sarah," he called me. "Yes, Dad." I walked over. He looked at me for a long time, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Finally, he asked, "Do you know why your mother did that?" I remained silent. He gave a sad smile. "You probably think she's greedy for money," I said softly. "I wouldn't dare to think that." He shook his head. "No, she is greedy." He looked out the window. "But she wasn't always like this." His voice lowered. "When we were young, our family was very poor. She sold vegetables at the market from 4 a.m. Some days it rained, but she would still go out in the rain, just to feed our 2 children." I said nothing. He continued, "But when people are poor for too long, the moment they see money, they become so afraid of losing it that they do things they themselves don't even recognize." The room was quiet. I knew he was telling the truth, but that didn't change one fact. They had wanted to harm me. That afternoon, the police called me. They wanted me to come to the station to give a supplementary statement. I put on a coat and went down to the parking garage. It was starting to get dark, and a cold wind blew through the complex. Just as I opened my car door, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned my head, saw no one. But as I was about to get in the car, my phone vibrated again. A new message. "You're very calm. For someone who almost died. You're still remarkably composed." My heart stopped. I looked around the garage. Yellow lights cast down on the silent, parked cars. No one was there. I quickly typed a line. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who knows the truth." I gripped my phone tighter. What truth? This time, it took a few seconds for the new message to arrive. "That glass of whiskey was never meant for you." I froze. That sentence hit me like a physical blow. Not meant for me? But Mark had made it clear that glass was for me. I typed back, "What are you talking about?" No reply. The person had gone silent. On the way to the police station, that sentence repeated over and over in my head. That glass of whiskey was never meant for you. If it wasn't for me, then who was it for? I replayed that dinner in my mind, remembering every detail, every word, every look. But the more I thought, the more confused I became, because everything pointed to me being their target. When I arrived at the station, Detective Miller was already waiting. He invited me to sit down. On the table was a file. "We've interrogated Mark and Linda," he said. "They both admitted to putting the drug in the whiskey." I nodded, but... He paused for a moment. "There's a rather strange detail." I looked at him. What detail? He opened the file. In Mark's testimony, he stated that the poisoned glass was the one placed to his right. I frowned. Right. That glass was initially mine. Detective Miller shook his head. No. He looked directly at me. The living room security camera shows that the glass was initially placed in front of Jessica. My whole body stiffened. Impossible. He turned his computer monitor towards me. On it was the camera footage from that night. I saw it clearly. When Mark placed the two glasses on the table, one was in front of me, the other was in front of Jessica. Then everyone talked for a few minutes before I suggested switching glasses. I felt the blood drain from my face. If I hadn't switched glasses, the person drinking that glass wouldn't have been me, but Jessica, Detective Miller said slowly. This means that the intended recipient of that glass was Mark's sister. But because you switched, Mark drank it instead. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Everything was starting to become incomprehensible. If they wanted to harm me, why was the glass placed in front of Jessica? I left the police station when it was completely dark, my mind in turmoil. The night wind made me shiver. Just then, my phone vibrated again. A message from the unknown number. Do you understand now? I typed back. What are you talking about? The reply came. The person they wanted to kill wasn't you. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The next message appeared. It was Jessica. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. Cars passed by, their headlights sweeping across the cold, wet pavement. In my hand, the phone screen still glowed with the last message. The person they wanted to kill wasn't you. It was Jessica. My heart was racing. A strong gust of wind made me shiver. If the person they wanted to harm was Jessica, then everything I had thought from the beginning was wrong. But why? Why did Mark say the glass was for me? Why did Linda say they needed me to be asleep to transfer the money? Everything was contradictory. I quickly typed a line. Who are you? The reply was swift. The one who saw everything. I gripped my phone tighter. What did you see? A few seconds passed. The next message appeared. That night, in the kitchen, someone switched the bottle of whiskey. My whole body went rigid. Switched the bottle? I remembered very clearly. That night, Mark went into the kitchen to get the whiskey. He brought out a bottle from the cabinet. If that bottle had been switched, then who went into the kitchen before him? A name popped into my head. Jessica. I drove home in an almost trance-like state. The familiar road seemed alien tonight. Conflicting thoughts swirled in my head. If Jessica was the one who switched the bottle, then the initial target of the poison wasn't me, nor was it her. It was Mark. The thought made my heart pound. No. Impossible. But if that was true, then Jessica's death was an accident she brought upon herself. When I got back to the apartment, Richard was still in the living room. The yellow light cast on his aged face. He saw me come in. You're back from the police station? Yes. I took off my coat and sat in the chair opposite him. After a moment, I asked, Dad? Yes? He looked at me. I spoke slowly. Don't you find it strange? He frowned. Strange about what? The glass of whiskey that night was initially placed in front of Jessica. He was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. It could have been a coincidence. I shook my head. No, I don't think it was a coincidence. He looked at me intently. What are you suspecting? I didn't answer right away, because just then, my phone vibrated again. A new message. I'm in the parking garage. Come down. I shot up from my seat. The underground parking garage was deserted. The cold, white fluorescent lights shone down. I walked slowly between the silently parked cars. Where are you? I said softly. No answer. But a few seconds later, from behind a concrete pillar, a man stepped out. He was in his 30s, tall and slender, his face vaguely familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen him. He looked at me. Hello. Sarah. I took half a step back. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. just glanced around the garage, then said, "My name is Kevin. I'm a friend of Jessica's." The statement surprised me. "A friend of Jessica's?" He nodded. "We've known each other for over 3 years." I looked at him carefully. If he was telling the truth, why had I never heard Jessica mention him? Kevin leaned against the pillar, his voice lowering. "I was here that night." I frowned. "You were following her?" He shook his head. "I came to meet her. She called me." My heart pounded. "She called you?" "Yes." He looked directly at me. "She said something big was going to happen that night." A chill ran down my spine. "What?" Kevin sighed. "She was planning to run away." I was stunned. "Run away?" He nodded. "She said her brother had won the lottery, and she was going to get the money that night." I asked, "How was she going to get it?" Kevin looked down. "She said she was going to give her brother a drink." My heart clenched. "What kind of drink?" "She said it was poison." The air in the garage seemed to freeze. Kevin continued. "She told me to have a car ready. After her brother was dead, she would take the money and we would leave together." My head was spinning. "So the bottle of whiskey?" "Yes." Kevin nodded. "Jessica switched the bottle in the kitchen. I saw her through the glass door. She put something in the bottle." I clenched my hands. "But in the end, she was the one who died." Kevin gave a sad smile. "Because you switched the glasses." I was silent for a long time. All the pieces were starting to fall into place. Linda gave Mark the drug to harm me, but Jessica had her own plan. She switched the bottle to harm her own brother. 2 plots. 2 plans. Intersecting on the same night. And the result was Jessica's own death. I looked at Kevin. "You took the picture of me at the hospital." He nodded. "I wanted to make sure you were still alive. I was afraid you'd get caught up in it too," I asked. "So why didn't you tell the police this?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Because if I did, they would know I was helping her run away." I understood. He wasn't entirely innocent either. Before leaving, Kevin said something that chilled me to the bone. "Sarah, there were 2 murder plots that night, but I think—" He looked directly into my eyes. "There might have been a 3rd. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer, just said, "You should be careful. This isn't over yet." I stood alone in the parking garage for a long time. The sound of Kevin's footsteps had long since faded, but his last words echoed in my head. There might have been a 3rd. If that was true, then Jessica's death wasn't just an accident. It was part of a larger plan. I left the parking garage very slowly. The sound of my footsteps echoed dryly in the cold, cavernous space. Kevin's words were still swirling in my head. There were 2 murder plots that night, but there might have been a 3rd. If there really was a 3rd person, who could it be? I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. In the metal mirror, I saw myself a pale face, eyes full of doubt. I never thought my 8-year marriage would lead me into a maze like this. 1 dinner, 3 plots, and 1 death. When the elevator doors opened, the apartment was still quiet. Richard was still in the living room. He was looking at the TV, but the screen was just showing a news program that he didn't seem to be paying attention to. He turned his head when he saw me. "What took you so long downstairs?" "I went to get something from the car," I said, taking off my shoes. He nodded, not asking any more questions. After a moment, he said, "Sarah." "Yes, Dad. I've been thinking all day today." He sighed. "This family probably can't go back to the way it was." I sat down in the chair opposite him. "Don't overthink it, Dad." He gave a sad smile. "How can I not? My daughter is dead. My son is arrested. And my wife." He stopped, not continuing. I knew he was thinking of Linda, a mother who had just lost her daughter and was also taken away by the police on suspicion of being involved in that death. After a moment, Richard asked, "Sarah." "Yes. Do you hate this family?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, a man in his 60s, his back slightly stooped, his eyes tired. He didn't seem like someone trying to protect his family. He seemed like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare. I said softly, "I don't hate you, Dad." He nodded. "And Mark?" I was silent for a long time. Finally, I just said one thing. "I don't know." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind was still trying to piece together the scattered fragments. Mark and Linda wanted to harm me. Jessica wanted to harm Mark, but Kevin said there might be a third person. Who could it be? I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly remembered a small detail. That night, when Mark went into the kitchen to get the whiskey, Linda had also gone into the kitchen before him, just for a few minutes. But at the time, I didn't pay attention. My heart pounded. If two people went into the kitchen, then it wasn't just Jessica who had the opportunity to switch the bottle. The next morning, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. "Is this Sarah Miller?" A man's voice. "Yes. This is Detective Miller. We need to see you one more time." When I arrived at the police station, Detective Miller was standing in front of a whiteboard in his office. On the board were several photos. The whiskey bottle, the two glasses, the living room that night. He turned when he saw me. "You're here?" "Yes." He pointed to a chair. "Please, have a seat." I sat down, but my eyes were still on the board. The images were like a picture slowly coming into focus. Detective Miller said, "We've re-examined all the security camera footage from the apartment." My heart tightened slightly. "And we found a new detail." He played a video clip. On the screen was the kitchen from that night. I saw Jessica. She opened the liquor cabinet, took a bottle, and then took something from her purse. After a few seconds, she put that something into the bottle. My heart was pounding, but the video didn't stop. About 2 minutes later, another person walked into the kitchen. Linda. She opened the cabinet, looked around, then took another bottle of whiskey. Then she took a small packet from her pocket and put it in the bottle. I went cold all over. "That means," I whispered. Detective Miller nodded. "Yes. There were 2 different types of poison in the bottle of whiskey." I was speechless. 2 poisons, 2 people, 2 plans, he continued. Jessica's poison was a slow-acting type, but Linda's poison was cyanide. That can kill a person in minutes. I looked at the screen. The image of Jessica foaming at the mouth on the floor flashing in my mind. That meant she died from her own mother's poison, I asked softly. "And Mark?" Detective Miller sighed. "He truly believed it was a sleeping pill, but he still has to take responsibility for putting the drug in your glass." I nodded. Before I left, Detective Miller said something that made me stop. "Miss Miller." I turned back. "Yes?" He looked at me. "Someone sent us another video." My heart pounded. "What video?" He looked directly into my eyes. "A video taken from the parking garage last night." I felt my throat go dry. "It shows you and a man." I knew immediately who he was talking about. "Kevin," Detective Miller asked slowly. "Can you explain why you were meeting with this man?" I was silent for a few seconds. Kevin's words echoed in my head. There might have been a third. If I told them everything, things would change. I took a breath and said, "He's a friend of Jessica's." Detective Miller's gaze sharpened. "And he told me." I paused. The room was silent. That Jessica was the one who put the poison in the bottle. The interrogation room was silent. After I said that, Detective Miller didn't respond immediately. He just looked at me for a long time, his gaze sharp but unhurried. I understood. A seasoned investigator wouldn't easily believe any testimony. He pressed a button, and the monitor showing the parking garage video went black. The room was left with only the cold, white light. "Go on," he said slowly. "What else did this man say?" I took a deep breath. Kevin's face under the fluorescent lights of the parking garage flashing in my mind. I knew I had to be very careful, because one wrong detail could turn all suspicion back on me. He said that Jessica had called him that night. I began to recount. She said she was going to do something big, and then she was going to leave with him. Detective Miller nodded slightly. The big thing was killing her own brother. I didn't answer, just nodded. He jotted down a few notes, then asked, "So why didn't he report this to the police?" I asked him the same question, I replied. He said if he did, he would be implicated as well. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then Detective Miller said, "We're going to find this man." I nodded, but in my heart, I knew Kevin wouldn't be easy for them to find. When I left the police station, it was already dark. The night wind blew, and I pulled my coat tighter. The streets were crowded, but I still felt like someone was watching me. Ever since this all happened, that feeling had rarely left me. Just as I stepped off the curb, my phone vibrated. It wasn't an unknown number this time, but a text from Richard. "Are you home yet?" I replied. A moment later, he texted back, "I need to talk to you." When I got home, Richard was still in the living room. There was a teapot and 2 cups on the table. He looked at me. "Sit down." I sat in the chair opposite him. He poured tea, the steam rising in a faint mist. After a moment, he said, "I just got a call from a lawyer." I looked at him. "A lawyer?" He nodded. "I asked a friend to find a lawyer for Mark." I said nothing. He sighed. "No matter what, he's still my son." I understood. No matter what happened, a father couldn't abandon his child. He took a sip of tea, then continued. "The lawyer said if we can prove Mark didn't know it was poison, his sentence will be lighter." I asked softly, "And Mom?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "It's difficult. Cyanide is a highly potent poison. It's very hard to explain." The room fell silent again. After a moment, he looked at me. "Sarah." "Yes, Dad. Are you planning to divorce Mark?" The question surprised me. I looked at him. He continued, "I don't blame you. If you want to leave this family, I understand." I didn't answer right away, because another thought was in my head. That night, as I was lying in bed, my phone vibrated again. A text from Kevin. "I heard you talk to the police." My heart tightened slightly. I just told the truth. The reply came quickly. "You didn't tell the whole truth." I typed back, "What do you mean?" A few seconds passed. Then a line of text appeared on the screen that made me go cold. "You didn't tell them that you also went into the kitchen that night." I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. He knew about that. I stared at my phone, a memory suddenly surfacing. Yes. Before Mark went into the kitchen to get the whiskey, I had also gone in, just for a few seconds, to get a paper towel. But at that time, I had also opened the liquor cabinet. I remembered it clearly. The bottle of whiskey was on the inside. I had picked it up, then put it back. I quickly typed, "What are you trying to say?" The reply came, "I saw you through the kitchen's glass door. You picked up the bottle." I felt my throat go dry. So what? After a moment, a new message arrived. "I'm just curious. Are you sure you didn't do anything else?" I put the phone down, my head spinning. Did I do anything else that night? I tried to remember, but the memory was hazy. I only remembered that when I held the bottle, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't remember what. The next morning, when I walked out into the living room, I saw Richard standing by the door, an envelope in his hand. He looked at me. "Sarah." "Yes?" "Someone sent this for you." I took the envelope. There was no return address. Inside was just a photo. I took it out. My heart immediately started pounding, because in the photo was me, standing in the kitchen that night, holding the bottle of whiskey. On the back of the photo was a line of handwritten text. "Are you sure you're innocent?" I held the photo in my hand for a long time. The morning light streamed through the living room window, falling on the table, but inside me, it was as cold as if I had just stepped into a dark room. The photo was indeed of me. I was standing in the kitchen, holding the bottle of whiskey, the shot taken from outside the glass door, as if someone had been standing in the hallway and taken a picture in secret. On the back, just one line. "Are you sure you're innocent?" I gripped the photo tightly. Richard looked at me. "What's wrong?" I took a breath and handed him the photo. He put on his glasses and looked at it closely. His eyebrows immediately furrowed. "This is our kitchen." "Yes." He looked at the photo again. "From that night?" I nodded. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Did you do anything to the bottle?" That question made my throat go dry. I remembered it clearly. I had gone into the kitchen that night, just for a few seconds. I had picked up the bottle. But what had I done? I tried to remember, but my mind could only conjure a vague image. The bottle, the kitchen lights, and the feeling that something wasn't right. I really don't remember," I said softly. Richard looked at me for a long time. His eyes held no blame, only weariness. He sighed. "This is getting more and more complicated." I nodded. "I think someone is intentionally trying to frame me." He looked at the photo one more time, then said, "You should give this to the police." But before I could do anything, my phone vibrated again. A new message. I looked at the screen. It was still the unknown number. "Did you get the photo?" My heart stopped. I quickly typed, "Who are you?" The reply came, "Someone who knows the truth." I gripped my phone tighter. "What truth?" A few seconds later, a new message appeared. "The truth that you also switched the bottle that night." I stood frozen. The air in the living room seemed to solidify. I looked at the photo again, the image of me holding the bottle. My head started to spin. If what that person said was true, if I had really switched the bottle, then everything had happened in a completely different way. "What's wrong?" Richard asked. I flinched. I couldn't tell him about the message. "At least, not yet. Nothing," I said. But in my head, there was only one question. Did I switch the bottle that night? That afternoon, I decided to go back to the apartment. Not the living room, not the bedroom, but the kitchen. The kitchen was exactly the same as that night. The liquor cabinet in the corner, the stone countertop, the white lights. I stood in front of the cabinet and opened the door. Inside were a few other bottles of whiskey, but the one from that night had been taken by the police. I closed my eyes, trying to remember. That night I came in here. I opened the cabinet, picked up the bottle, and then a memory suddenly flashed. I remembered. At that moment, I felt the bottle was too light. Not like a full bottle of whiskey. I had shaken it slightly, heard the liquid sloshing inside, and I thought, maybe this bottle has already been opened. I didn't want to take an opened bottle, so I put it aside and took another one from the back. My heart was pounding. If that memory was real, then I was the one who switched the bottle. But I didn't know it was poisoned. I had simply switched to a different bottle. I immediately took out my phone and called Detective Miller. He answered after a few rings. "Miss Miller." "Yes." I remembered something. An hour later, I was at the police station. Detective Miller listened to my story, then was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes. I remember the bottle felt too light. I thought it had been opened, so I switched to another one." He looked at me, his expression becoming serious. "Do you understand what this means?" I nodded. "If I switched the bottle, then the poisoned bottle from Jessica wasn't the one everyone drank." He nodded. "Correct. Which means Jessica's plan never succeeded." I looked at him. So the poison that killed her could only have come from her mother. The room was silent. After a few seconds, Detective Miller said, "This changes a lot of things." I nodded. But I still had one question. "But who sent me that photo?" He frowned. "We're investigating that as well." When I left the police station, it was dark. I stood in front of the entrance, the night wind making me shiver. My phone vibrated again. A message. "I know you remembered." I typed back, "Who are you?" After a moment, a new message arrived. "I'm the one who took that picture." I asked. "Why did you do it?" The reply came. "Because I don't want Linda to take all the blame." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The final message appeared. Because the person who gave her the cyanide was Richard. I stood frozen in front of the police station. The phone screen still glowed with the last message. The person who gave her the cyanide was Richard. A cold wind blew past. But the chill I felt now wasn't from the weather, but from the thought in my head. Richard, my father-in-law, the man who had just had tea with me this morning, the man who had said this family was shattered. No, I immediately shook my head. Impossible. I quickly typed a line. You're lying. The reply came almost instantly. I'm not lying. I gripped my phone tighter. Do you have proof? A few seconds passed. Then the screen lit up again. A photo. I opened it. My heart stopped. In the photo was Richard. He was standing in the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was 20 minutes before dinner. In his hand was a small packet. I went cold all over. If this photo was real, then it wasn't just Jessica and Linda who went into the kitchen that night, but Richard too. 3 people, 3 trips to the kitchen, 3 opportunities to change the bottle. I looked up at the road ahead. Cars passed by, the red and green lights blinking. But in my head there was only one question. If Richard really gave Linda the cyanide, who was his target? Me or Mark? I drove home in a heavy state. When I opened the apartment door, Richard was standing in the kitchen. He turned around. You're home. I looked at him. The kitchen light shone on his face, kind, tired. Not like someone who could give his wife poison, but the photo on my phone was still there. What are you doing, Dad? I asked. I'm making some porridge, he said. You probably haven't eaten all day. That sentence made my heart ache slightly. In my 8 years as a daughter-in-law, Richard had always been the kindest to me in this family. Even when Linda complained about me not having a child, he would always say it wasn't my fault. But now, I didn't know what to believe. Dad, I said. Yes? Were you in the kitchen that night? He was stirring the porridge. His movement paused for a second, then continued. Yes, he said calmly. Why do you ask? I looked at him. I just want to know what you were doing in the kitchen. He turned his head. His eyes were slightly surprised. I went to get some water. Is there something strange? I said nothing, just quietly looked at him. In my head, I was replaying the photo. Richard holding a small packet. But now, his hands were empty. I didn't know if I should ask more. He put the spoon down and looked at me. Sarah, yes? Is there something you want to ask me? I was silent for a few seconds, then took out my phone, opened the photo, and placed it on the table. Richard leaned down to look. When he saw the photo, his expression changed. Not panic, not fear, but a deep weariness. He sat down in a chair and sighed. Where did you get this? He asked. Someone sent it to me, I said. He nodded slowly. I see. After a moment, he said, Yes, that packet was mine. My heart pounded. You gave it to Mom. He was silent, then nodded. I did. The room was dead silent. The sound of the porridge simmering in the kitchen. I asked softly. Did you know it was cyanide? He shook his head. No. I thought it was just a sleeping pill. This answer was exactly what Mark had said. I looked at him. Where did you get it? He looked down at the table. Jessica gave it to me. I felt like something heavy had just dropped in my chest. Jessica? He nodded. She said she wanted to make her brother fall asleep so she could take the money and run away. I stood there, stunned. And you agreed? He gave a sad smile. I thought if Mark just slept for a few hours, then everything would be fine. I looked at him. Did you know it was poison? He shook his head again. If I had known, I would never have given it to your mother. His voice grew hoarse. I made a mistake. I sat down. My mind was in a whirlwind. Jessica gave Richard the cyanide. Richard gave it to Linda. Linda put it in the bottle of whiskey, and Jessica was the one who drank it. After a moment, I asked, Have you told the police this? He shook his head. No. I was afraid if I did, your mother's sentence would be harsher. Just then, the doorbell rang. Both Richard and I flinched. He got up and went to open the door. Outside was Detective Miller. He stepped in, his expression stern. Sorry to come so late, he said. but we've just received a new piece of video footage. My heart pounded. What video? He took out a tablet and played the video. On the screen was footage from the hallway camera, pointed at the kitchen. I saw it clearly. A person standing outside the glass door, holding a phone, taking pictures inside. That person was Kevin. Detective Miller looked at me, then at Richard. It seems, he said slowly, that this man knows more than he's letting on. The kitchen fell into silence. The video on Detective Miller's tablet was paused on a single frame. In it, through the slightly open kitchen door, a man could be seen stand in the hallway, holding a phone, taking pictures of the inside. It was Kevin. I stared at the screen. His words to me in the parking garage the night before, echoing in my head. There were 2 murder plots that night, but there might have been a third. Now I realized. He hadn't just seen everything. He had been monitoring it from the very beginning. Richard sat motionless at the table, his eyes glued to the screen. "That's Jessica's friend?" he asked softly. I nodded. Detective Miller turned off the video and looked at us. "More than just a friend," he said. "We've checked Jessica's phone. There are hundreds of messages with this person." I felt my heart sink. "Is he involved in what happened that night?" Detective Miller nodded slowly. "It's very likely." He placed the tablet on the table. "We've verified some information. This man's name is Kevin, 33 years old, formerly a real estate agent, but has been in a lot of debt for the past 2 years." I clenched my hands. "That means he needed money." Detective Miller nodded. "A lot of money." The room was silent again. I remembered that night in the parking garage, when he told me Jessica was planning to kill Mark for the money and run away with him. At the time, I believed him. But now, something felt wrong. Detective Miller continued. "We've checked the security cameras in the parking garage. That night, Kevin arrived very early, even before dinner started." My heart pounded. "Before dinner started?" "Yes." He looked at me. "Which means he knew what was going to happen beforehand." Richard said softly, "But Jessica was the one who called him." Detective Miller shook his head. "Not necessarily." He took out a folder and placed it on the table. "This is the call history from Jessica's phone." I looked down. The numbers were clear. The last call between Jessica and Kevin was 2 days before the dinner. After that, there were no more calls. I frowned. "But he said Jessica called him that night." Detective Miller nodded. "We found that strange too." He paused for a moment, then continued. "So we checked Kevin's phone." He looked directly at me. "And on his phone, there's an audio recording." My heart pounded. "What recording?" He opened the tablet again and pressed play. In the quiet kitchen, a recording played, Jessica's voice. "You remember, right? After my brother drinks the whiskey, it will all be over." I went cold. Kevin's voice in the recording asked, "And your sister-in-law?" Jessica laughed. "She's not important. The money belongs to my brother. As long as he's dead, everything will be mine." The recording stopped. The kitchen was so silent, you could hear the clock ticking. I looked at Detective Miller. "So Jessica's plan was real?" He nodded. "Yes. But there's still something that doesn't make sense." He looked directly at me. "If Jessica was planning to kill her own brother, why did she drink that glass of whiskey?" I was silent. Because that was the very question that had been bothering me the most from the beginning. After a moment, Richard said softly, "Maybe she didn't know there was cyanide in the whiskey." Detective Miller nodded. "Correct. But the question is," he paused, "why did she drink that glass?" I remembered that dinner. Remembered the moment I switched the glasses. Everything happened so quickly, no one noticed. But if Jessica knew there was poison in the bottle, she would never have drunk from it. Unless, I looked at Detective Miller. Maybe she thought that glass wasn't hers. He frowned. "What do you mean?" I said slowly. "That night, after Mark poured the whiskey, everyone talked for a few minutes. Maybe during that time, Jessica thought the poisoned glass was Mark's." The kitchen was silent. Detective Miller thought for a few seconds, then nodded. "It's possible." But just then, My phone vibrated. A new message. I looked at the screen. The sender. Kevin. My heart pounded. I opened the message. Just one line. I know the police found the recording. I immediately typed back. Where are you? The reply came. It doesn't matter. I gripped my phone tighter. You lied to me. After a moment, a new message arrived. No, I just didn't tell the whole truth. I felt a chill run down my back. What other truth? The screen lit up again. Jessica wasn't the only one who wanted to kill Mark. I stared at that line of text. What do you mean? The final message appeared. The first person who thought of killing Mark wasn't Jessica. It was Linda. I looked up at Detective Miller. A sudden feeling in my gut that this story was far from over. Kevin's message still glowed on the phone screen. The first person who thought of killing Mark wasn't Jessica. It was Linda. I read the line over and over. Outside the window, it was completely dark. The streetlights cast long streaks of light on the kitchen floor. I looked up at Detective Miller. He was standing by the table, his gaze calm but sharp. What is it? He asked. I hesitated for a second, then handed him the phone. Detective Miller read the message, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't say anything immediately, just placed the phone on the table. You're still in contact with Kevin? Yes. He initiated it. He nodded. Reply to him. I looked at him. What should I say? Just ask, he said slowly. Ask him what he knows. I took back the phone, my fingers trembling slightly. I typed a line. What do you mean by that? The message sent. A few seconds passed. The screen lit up, because I personally heard Linda talking about it. My heart pounded. That night, the reply came. 3 days before. I read the message aloud. Detective Miller and Richard both listened in silence. The next message appeared. That day, I went to Jessica's house. She wasn't home yet. I was waiting in the hallway, and I heard Linda on the phone. I gripped the phone tighter. What did she say? The screen showed a new line of text. She was telling someone that if Mark died, all the money would stay in the family's hands. The kitchen was dead silent. Richard stood frozen. Impossible, he said softly. I looked at him. Dad? Did you know about this? He shook his head. His eyes were bewildered. I never heard her say that. My phone vibrated again. The next message from Kevin. At the time, I thought I misheard. But after Jessica told me her plan to kill her brother, I started to understand. I typed back, understand what? The reply came. Jessica didn't come up with that plan on her own. She was just repeating her mother's idea. The room grew heavy. Detective Miller said slowly, This explains a lot. I looked at him. What do you mean? He said. If Linda was the first one to think of killing Mark, then her preparing cyanide wasn't a random act. I felt my throat go dry. That means she had it planned beforehand. He nodded. Correct. Richard sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Why? He murmured. Linda, why would you do that? No one could answer that question. Just then, Detective Miller's phone rang. He answered, and after only a few seconds, his expression changed. He hung up and looked at me. Sarah. Yes? We just received the results of a check on Linda's bank account. My heart pounded. What is it? He said slowly. 3 weeks ago, Linda transferred a large sum of money to an unknown account. I looked at him. How much? $200,000. I was shocked. What was that money for? Detective Miller looked directly at me. We've just identified the account holder. I held my breath. Who is it? He answered. Kevin. The kitchen felt like it had been flash frozen. I felt my heart drop. Kevin had taken money from my mother-in-law. Detective Miller nodded. Yes, which means... He paused. He's not just Jessica's friend. I immediately opened my phone and quickly typed a line. You took money from Linda. The message sent. A few seconds later, the reply came. Yes. I stared at the screen. So you were part of that plan too. The next message appeared. I didn't want to kill anyone. Linda just hired me to follow Mark. Detective Miller read the message. He said, "This means Linda had been planning this for a long time." I typed again. "Why did you follow Mark?" The reply came. "To know when he was going to claim the money, and when the best time would be." My heart pounded. The best time to kill him. The message appeared. Yes. I felt a cold dread wash over me. One family, one dinner. But behind it all was a plan that had been in motion for weeks. I looked at Detective Miller. "What do we do now?" He thought for a few seconds, then said, "We need to find Kevin." But just then, my phone vibrated one more time. A new message. I opened it. Just one line. "I'm downstairs." I looked up. The eyes of Detective Miller and Richard were also on me. I said softly, "It's Kevin." Detective Miller immediately stood up. "Let's go downstairs." When we stepped out of the elevator, the underground parking garage came into view. The cold, white lights shone down on the silent cars. In the middle of the garage, a man stood, his hands in his pockets. It was Kevin. He looked at us, his expression calm, and then said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You finally know the truth." The underground parking garage was cold and quiet. The white fluorescent lights cast long, cold streaks on the concrete floor. In the middle of that space, Kevin stood silently, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on us. I slowed my pace. Behind me was Detective Miller. Beside me, Richard. The air was so heavy you could hear the echo of our footsteps in the empty garage. Kevin looked at me and gave a slight smile. "You finally know the truth." Detective Miller took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Kevin, we need your cooperation." Kevin looked at him and shrugged. "I know," he said. "That's why I came." I looked at Kevin. Under the white lights of the garage, his face no longer had the calm demeanor of the night before. There was something like exhaustion, like someone who had been running for too long and finally decided to stop. Detective Miller asked, "What do you know?" Kevin sighed and spoke slowly. "I knew about Linda's plan, and I knew about Jessica's plan." He looked at me, but I never expected it to end like this. Detective Miller looked at him. "Explain." Kevin nodded. "I've known Jessica for over 3 years. At first, we were just friends." Then he gave a faint smile. "She said she would help me pay off all my debts." I asked softly, "How?" Kevin looked at me. "With her brother's money." That sentence made the garage feel even colder. He continued, "At first, I thought she was just talking, but then she started talking about killing Mark. She said as long as Mark was dead, all the money would be hers." Behind me, I could hear Richard's heavy breathing. "That girl," he murmured. Kevin continued, "But then Linda came to me." I looked at him. "She came to you?" Kevin nodded. "She told me to just follow Mark, to just let her know when the best time was." Detective Miller asked, "The best time for what?" Kevin looked straight at him. "To kill Mark." The air in the garage seemed to solidify. I looked at Kevin. "So you took her money?" "Yes," he admitted, "but I didn't think she would actually do it." He gave a sad smile. "I was wrong," Detective Miller asked. "And that night?" Kevin looked down at the floor. "That night, everything spiraled out of control. Jessica had switched the bottle. Linda had also put in the cyanide, and Mark," he sighed, "he just thought it was a sleeping pill." I asked, "So why didn't you stop it?" Kevin looked at me, his eyes heavy. "I was going to, but when I was standing in the hallway, I heard something. I held my breath." "What?" Kevin said slowly. "Linda told Richard that she had no other choice." I turned to look at Richard. He stood motionless, his face pale. Kevin continued. "She said Mark had borrowed a lot of money. If they didn't get the lottery money, the whole family would go bankrupt." I felt my heart sink. I turned to Richard. "Dad, is that true?" He closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes." His voice was hoarse. "Mark had been hiding it from everyone. His investments failed. He was nearly 10 million in debt. I stood there, stunned. 8 years as his wife, and I never knew. Richard continued. Linda knew about it before I did. She thought if Mark died, the insurance money and the lottery winnings would save the family. A cold wind blew through the garage. No one spoke. Kevin looked at us, but in the end, the one who died was Jessica. He gave a bitter laugh, a family wanting to kill each other for money, and in the end, no one won. Detective Miller stepped forward. Mr. Kevin, you need to come with us. Kevin nodded, not resisting. Before he left, he turned to look at me. Sarah, I looked at him. He said softly, maybe you're the only one in this family who didn't want to kill anyone. He turned his back, and the police led him away. The garage was quiet again. I stood there for a long time, then turned to Richard. He had aged so much in just a few days. Dad, I said. Yes? I think it's time for this to end. He nodded. His eyes were sad. You want to divorce Mark, don't you? I was silent, then nodded. 1 month later, the court passed sentence. Linda was convicted of murder. Mark was convicted as an accomplice. Kevin was convicted as a co-conspirator. And me, I left that house with a small suitcase. The day I left, Richard stood at the door. He said, Sarah, yes? I'm sorry. I looked at him and said softly, you don't need to apologize. I walked out that door, a door that had closed on 8 years of my life. Many people think winning the lottery is a blessing, but sometimes money doesn't bring happiness. It just makes people reveal their true nature. And I was just lucky that night that I switched the glasses. Sarah's story comes to a close, but its resonance leaves anyone who hears it silent for a long moment. As the narrator, and as someone who has heard many life stories, I truly want to say a few things to Sarah. First of all, Sarah, you did something very difficult. You survived and maintained your composure in a situation where many people would have crumbled. When you saw your husband's trembling hand and quietly switched the glasses, it wasn't just a reflex of alertness. It was the intuition of a woman who had endured for too long, who had observed too many abnormalities in that family. But what is most thought-provoking in this story isn't the $40 million lottery ticket. The most terrifying thing is how money strips people bare. A mother can contemplate killing her own son. A sister can plan to murder her own brother. A husband is willing to put poison in his wife's drink. When greed and the fear of losing money combine, family bonds can become so distorted that they are unrecognizable. Sarah did the right thing by leaving. Some marriages don't end because of a lack of love, but because one realizes that staying is no longer safe. A home where you have to be wary of every glass of water, every meal, is no longer a family. I also want to say to those who are listening to this story, never think that money can solve everything. In many life stories, money doesn't bring families closer. It only exposes the cracks that already existed. If a family already has suspicion, ambition, and selfishness, a large sum of money is like a flame. It doesn't create new evil, it just makes the existing evil burn more fiercely. And for Sarah, perhaps the biggest lesson isn't about winning the lottery. The lesson is that there are people in life whom we must have the courage to walk away from, no matter how many years we've been connected. Because sometimes, leaving isn't a failure. Leaving is the only way to save your life, your self-respect, and your future. I believe that after everything she has been through, Sarah is no longer the weak woman of 8 years ago. The person who walked out of that house with a small suitcase was actually carrying the most precious things: her clarity and her freedom. And for anyone listening to this story on this channel, if you take one thing away, remember this: money can change your life, but it is character that determines the fate of a person and of an entire family. If you find this story thought-provoking, please share it so that others can listen and reflect. Sometimes, just one life story is enough to help someone become more clear-headed in the face of the temptations of money. You're good to go, Richard said, standing at the door. He said, Sarah, yes? I'm sorry. I looked at him and said softly, "You don't need to apologize." I walked out that door. A door that had closed on 8 years of my life. Many people think winning the lottery is a blessing, but sometimes money doesn't bring happiness. It just makes people reveal their true nature. And I was just lucky that night that I switched the glasses,